All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program. My name is Lisa Versace, and I am the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the California Preservation Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization providing statewide leadership, advocacy, and education to ensure the protection of California's diverse cultural heritage and its historic places. Our work is supported by the incredibly generous support of our members, donors, and sponsors who really and truly make possible all of the free programs and, our free programs like this and everything that we do. Please consider joining or giving today if you are not already a member. And as a reminder, full-time students can get a 2-year complimentary student membership. Special thanks are also due to our annual education sponsor, Wish Jenny Elstner Associates, as well as today's program sponsor, Groundwork Preservation, LLC. We're joined today by guest speaker Annabel Lee Enriquez, project specialist at the Getty Conservation Institute and recently elected president of CPF's Board of Trustees. Annabel will be further introduced by today's moderator, Gretchen Hilliard-Boyce. Gretchen is a historian and preservation planner with over 20 years of experience working in the public and private sectors. In addition to being the founder of Groundwork Preservation, a cultural resources consulting practice based in Colfax, Gretchen is a member of CPF's Board of Trustees and vice president of our programs. Gretchen, I will hand it over to you to tell us a bit more about Annabel.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So we're so happy to have Annabel with us today. Annabel is a project specialist at the Getty Conservation Institute, where she's been working since 2013 on cultural heritage data, documentation, and technology. And much of her work focuses on the Arches project, an open source platform that helps communities and organizations better manage cultural resource inventories by sharing best practices and new technologies. There's a lot more to tell, and she's going to tell you all about her career and her path. And so I'll just turn it over to Annabel to get started. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Gretchen. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, let me go ahead and start my slides here. So I really look forward to discussing, I really look forward to discussing my career with you all. But hopefully, I think really what I would really like to get out of this is, or at least what I hope you get out of this, is that there are multiple ways and multiple pathways to contributing to the goal that we have with our preservation goals. Because I think that generally my career is kind of an edge case when it comes to preservation, because I don't actually know anyone who has the job that I do. So what I normally call myself is I'm a specialist in cultural heritage data, documentation, and technology. So essentially what I do broadly is to further the use of technology in cultural heritage and preservation, and make sure that it is being used to help what we're trying to do in preservation, to help our goals, our preservation goals, and never the other way around. Technology is always a tool. It is not the end. It is always the means. So I hope that's something that you get through my presentation. But yeah, so let's get through it. So this is my badge. I'm at the Getty Conservation Institute, as Gretchen mentioned. And so today I'm going to cover in my short present, I think it's going to be short. Hopefully I don't ramble, but what I'm going to cover today is what do I do? What do I do? How did I get here in terms of how did I get to what I do? And really, I think hopefully this is the bulk of today's time is your questions. So first of all, what do I do? Gretchen kind of touched upon what I do, but let's go through it. And I think the way to start with that is to talk about where I work. So I work at the Getty Conservation Institute. If you're not familiar, it is one of the 4 programs of the J. Paul Getty Trust, or the Getty. And this is an aerial image of the Getty campus in Brentwood in Southern California. And the arrow is pointing towards the building that the Getty Conservation Institute is housed in. And so at the Getty Conservation Institute, what we do is we look at ways to better conservation worldwide, whether that's through providing tools or educational materials to help conservation professionals be better and know what the best practices are in the field. So we do that. That's what we do. We advance practice in the conservation of cultural heritage internationally. And in service of that, the Arches project is a tool that the Getty Conservation Institute is spearheading the development of. It is an open source software platform to help preservation professionals manage data about cultural heritage. Now, that's a very broad definition of what Arches is. And in the context of CPF, probably the most important thing that Arches does is that it is the information system. It is an information system that can house inventories of historic places. And that actually is one of my main research and professional focuses or foci is the inventory of historic places. That's one of the reasons why I started in the field, and I'll get back to that in a little bit later when I talk about how I got here. But I truly believe in inventories as a core building block for preservation practice. The other thing that Arches does that I'm involved in, which is not as central to what we do at CPF, is I also work on using Arches to capture data about scientific research on art and architecture. But we'll focus more on the inventories of historic places. And I mentioned that the Getty Conservation Institute operates globally. We do. And what you're seeing is kind of a time lapse of how many organizations worldwide use Arches. And that's since 2012. I started with this project in 2013. And since then, we've grown in terms of usage to more than 120 organizations and projects that use Arches. And this is really important it's been really important for us to make sure that Arches is being used worldwide. But I do want to say that that is not our main goal in our project, at the Arches project. Our main goal is to make sure that we advance data management practices worldwide in conservation. So whether or not you use Arches, we want to make sure that data management, that we promote good data management practices worldwide. Now, that's all kind of abstract. And in terms of what I actually do day to day, along with the rest of the Arches project team, we're a small team of 6 at the Getty Conservation Institute. I help to guide the development of the software. We don't develop it in-house. We hire a development firm to do that, but we help to guide how that firm develops the software. And then the other part of that, because this is open source software, it's not just developing the software. We're not a private company that develops software. Or at least it's not proprietary software. We also foster the global Arches community. So there are 2 aspects to the Arches project, which is the software and then the community around the software. And then all of that is geared towards making sure that data management practices in the conservation field and the preservation field are as up to date as possible. And for me specifically, what I do is on the team, I provide training and guidance for those who want to implement Arches. So any organization that wants to use Arches to house their heritage inventory, I can help. I generally help those organizations, and I do that through webinars, community calls, user group meetings. Also, I do it one-on-one. There's only one of me, so I don't I don't do that very often, but I do. I actually, it's one of my favorite parts of my job is helping people to understand how to implement arches, and not just implement arches, but understand the basic principles that we're trying to promote through arches, including knowledge organization and data modeling practices. And so sometimes I like to think of arches as a way to bridge, kind of bridge the gap between the field of historic preservation or conservation and information sciences, not just in computer sciences, but also when we think about archives and libraries and that kind of work, the kind of information science that's going on in those fields, and bringing that information and that knowledge to heritage conservation. So that is kind of what, when I think of the Arches project, I think of it as doing that, as bringing, not just as a software project, but the software is the means to bring data management practices from those fields into preservation. And now I'm giving you all a very broad view of what I do, but there's a lot of little tiny things that I do because, like I said, I work on a very small team. So generally when you work on a small team, there's a lot that you do. And everyone kind of wears different hats. And so in the questions, feel free to ask me anything about what I do, and I can get a little bit more specific. Now, actually, one of my big red dots was well, the big red dot was, what do I do? But I think something that I didn't put was why. And I've kind of touched upon that about good data management practices, but why? So this is an image of arches being used for Historic Places LA. This is actually one of the first projects I worked on as part of the Arches project team. And we were, the Getty Conservation Institute had partnered with the city of LA for not just for their survey, but also for the implementation of their arches system called Historic Places LA. And I think one of why I do this is because I do think it is very important that that inventories are not just created, but they're made available to everyone, period. That it only benefits the field, it only benefits any preservation program to make their information on historic places readily available to the general public, and not only to professionals, because it helps to make sure that people understand what is historic, but also why things are historic, and that there is actually a method to the historic preservation, to any historic preservation designation. So I think that's something that's one of my whys that I've always, even when I was in graduate school, this was a core tenet for me, that inventories are a central building block of any successful preservation program. And the second why for me is that it can be summed up in this graphic, which is be fair and care. So FAIR is an acronym that represents the principles behind making data findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. Essentially what it means is make sure that your data is something that lives on, that has longevity beyond its initial use. And then the second part of this is care, collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And this is something that, this was originally developed by for indigenous populations to manage the stewardship of their data, to think about, for organizations to think about the responsible stewardship of indigenous data. but I think this is something that can be also thought about generally when you're thinking about dealing with data. So making sure that that you're thinking of people when you're thinking about data. So be fair and care. So those are kind of some of the reasons why I do what I do, is that generally I want to make sure that data serves preservation purposes, but also I want to make sure that it serves people. So that is a very core belief of mine. So I'm moving on to how I got here. So generally, when you think about someone's career trajectory and how they got to where they are, there's kind of what you see on a resume. You see like, okay, I got a BS in urban and regional studies. Then I got a graduate degree. And then I ended up getting the job I have now. And that, I wish it was that linear in my career, but maybe I don't actually. So my path to preservation, my path to this career is actually not as linear as this. So initially, when I started off in college, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in a city called Carson, California. And I knew that I wanted to see the world. I wanted to travel. And so I decided I wanted to be a diplomat. And I decided to go to school at American University in Washington, D.C. as an international studies major. And a lot of things happened. And what ended up happening is that I decided to transfer to focus on international development at Cornell University under the Urban and Regional Studies major. And I think this is a common story for a lot of people, is that when you're in your undergrad, it's a time for exploration. And, not only did I transfer schools, but while I was at Cornell, and studying under this major, Urban and Regional Studies. This is an interdisciplinary degree. There are 6 kind of different disciplines. International development was one of them. But the other thing that I had to study as part of that degree was the urban part, urban studies, urban design, architecture, and I fell in love with architecture. And I thought, oh my goodness, I want to be an architect. How do I make that happen with only 1 year of schooling left? And I decided, I wanted to finish my degree. So I decided to just continue on with urban and regional studies to graduate with that. And I figured I would work in architecture later, or I'd go to graduate school for architecture after my undergraduate. But something else happened too. While I was doing my undergrad, I learned about geographic information systems because my undergraduate job was working at the GIS lab in my department. Because obviously for urban and regional studies, geographic information systems was a big deal. And back then, it was something that I used for my research, which was mainly having to do with transportation. But I learned about GIS during my undergraduate degree. But I didn't think that was something that I was going to do as a career, because I thought I was going to be an architect or an urban designer. So I graduate and I work in the architecture, engineering, and construction and real estate industries for about a decade as a graphic designer and a marketing professional. So essentially what I did was, in addition to when I worked for an architecture or engineering firm, I was the marketing professional that put together responses to RFPs. And then when I worked for the California Association of Realtors, I was their in-house graphic designer. And so that was going on. I did that for about a decade. And I will say this, in the middle of that, all of that, I decided I didn't want to be an architect after working at an architecture firm. um, no shade to any of my architect friends, but I realized it wasn't for me. But I still liked designing. I liked working as a graphic designer. But also during this time, I volunteered at the LA Conservancy as a walking tour docent at the downtown LA Art Deco tour. So that was, I think, for me, because up until that point, I had not really thought about. I mean, I was in love with architecture. I love the history of architecture, but I hadn't thought of historic preservation as a potential career. But then after volunteering, I realized, oh, this is something I could do, but I still wasn't sure about it. I wasn't sure how my skills, how that would fit in my life. I did decide to go pursue. I decided to go to back to grad school because I kind of hit a point with graphic design where I thought, okay, I like it, but I didn't feel like I had a purpose. I didn't feel like I was doing something that had the kind of meaning that I was looking for. So I figured that I would pursue first a Master of Heritage Conservation, and then I tacked on a Master of Science in Geographic Information Science and Technology at USC. But I will say that before this, as I was trying to figure out how this was going to fit in my life, I did spend 2 years in the interior design program at UCLA Extension, thinking I was going to still go into design, but maybe do interior design. And I will say this: there were some classes in that program that definitely steered me more towards heritage conservation. I took some classes on the history of architecture and design, and yeah, and I think some of you might know Eleanor Schrader, and I took her classes, and it completely convinced me to go into heritage conservation. And so I went to school for that, and I interned at SciArc because I was still thinking that I wanted to do something that had to do with technology, because I had this GIS background. I knew I wanted to do design. I wanted design somewhere to be in there. And so I interned at SciArc and to focus more on 3D documentation of heritage places. And then I got my internship, the graduate internship at the Getty Conservation Institute for the project that I'm currently working on now, which is the Arches project. And that kind of, that really changed my life in the sense that I had never thought of data management. I mean, I had as a career, or thought of data in that way. I mean, I'd been kind of circling around it with my GIS work, with design, all of it, but I hadn't thought about it in that way. And I learned a lot about what good data management practices are through working on this project, through the Arches project. And it was then that during my internship, I finished my Master of Science in Geographic Information Science and Technology. As a note, I did not finish my Master of Heritage Conservation degree, which maybe at some point I will go back. I just have to write my thesis. Yeah, so that was kind of the trajectory of my career. And I will say that it's definitely not linear, at least not from my perspective, though I kind of charted it out as linear. But this is just kind of an example of showing you all, especially for those who are at the beginning of their careers, that there are many different pathways to getting to work in preservation. And I know so many folks at my organization who had never thought of working in preservation and conservation, but it was one project, one thing that led them to doing so. So anyway, that's kind of a whirlwind whistle-stop tour of my career. And if you have any questions about anything I've talked about my career trajectory, about my project, about data management in preservation, feel free to ask the questions, and more info on the project. There's the website, but also too, there's also a link to the book Inventories and Surveys for Heritage Management. This book was written by my colleague, my GCI colleague, David Myers, as well as with Janet Hansen, who was formerly the survey manager at Historic Place at City of Los Angeles. And I also have I wrote a chapter on the Arches project in this book, and this publication is available for free. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to read it online. All right. Okay, I'm ready for questions.
Thank
I'll
you,
stop sharing.
Annabelle. I think it's so great to hear this like nonlinear path, because I think we've had people that have had both like people like me, that I went straight through grad school and undergrad in history and sort of like knew that's what I wanted to do. But then there's like people that come at it and try all these different things. And it's interesting hearing you explain your career path to me. Like there's a real thread of design. Like you explored all
Yeah.
these different aspects of design and then ended up being interested in like data management and also heritage, like history of design in a way, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I feel like I want to ask you something before I jump into the audience questions.
Yeah.
I guess another thing I noticed from what you were talking about is like, we've had a lot of people talk about internships and the opportunities that internships offer, especially as people are trying to figure out what parts of the field they want to be involved in. And I'm
Yes.
curious, could you tell us just a little bit more, like, what was it like to intern at the Getty? Was it like, I mean, were you actually working on real projects, and just like, what was that experience like? Because clearly you ended up working there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you asked the question, did I end up working on real projects? Absolutely. It was a real job. The Getty internships they were absolutely a real job, which is why I only finished one of my master's degrees, because I was still so trying to work at the same time at work, as well as try to finish 2 degrees at the same time was something I definitely would not try to do again if I had to do it over again. I would have probably applied for the internship after I finished my degrees because it was a real job. I did, obviously, like with any job, there was kind of an onboarding process where I learned more about the project and more about my place in the organization. But yeah, no, I was doing real work, and I still refer back to some of that work now, like 13 years later.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So that was sort of like not just like a summer thing where you're getting coffee. It was like you were really thrown in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was definitely thrown in, and it was very much, I learned so much in that internship, and it was very much formative.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Another question I have before I jump to the audience questions is, when I've been on panel discussions with other colleagues, it's always the people that work at the Getty that get the most questions and the most excitement, because it does have this international scope, which I think is
Yeah.
rare. I think a lot of us work more in like state and local, at the state and local level. And so
Mhm.
I know you just returned from a big trip. Like, what percentage of your time is spent traveling and sort of like engaging in that international community versus being at
Um,
home at the Getty?
Well, I'd say this, that because, since the pandemic, there's so many ways to connect with our global community uh, online. And that's primarily how I do it. But I do go to conferences um, to hold workshops on the software and our project. So I'd say about yeah, so I do go to conferences a couple times a year to talk about the project, but it's mainly that I'm interfacing internationally with people
Mm-hmm.
online. So what that means a lot is that I have erratic sleep because I'm on Zooms very early in the morning or very late at night
Oh,
sometimes.
interesting.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. You have to be available.
Yeah, and sometimes it just can be hard. Some places are easier than others to work out times, but yeah, sometimes it can be very difficult.
Sorry, I had to sneeze.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right, I'm jumping to the audience questions now. So there's a lot of questions kind of specific about arches. The first one
Okay.
is just what types of organizations use arches?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I showed City of Los Angeles Planning Department, in California, City of San Francisco also is using arches for their survey process. Um, Currently, the California SHPO is in the process of implementing arches for the state inventory. And so just from the standpoint of statutory inventories, um, those are some people, those are some organizations in California that are using it. But then they're also within California at the Getty, my colleagues across campus at the Getty Research Institute are using arches for art historical research and other purposes. So it really runs the gamut of different organizations. But I will say this, that it is kind of like, it is heavy duty software, so it does require some technical capacity to host.
Hmm. So it sounds like it can be used at really different scales, like a city scale versus like when you're talking about on art conservation, is that like what would be an example of that?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, so the Getty Research Institute recently launched an ARCHES implementation where they're using that to house their art provenance data. And then they've got like 14 million art provenance records so that you could trace the sales of art and their provenance.
Hmm.
So other uses of ARCHES outside of California, uh, Greater London, their historic inventory is using arches. Historic England is using it for England's national inventory. Currently, Parks Canada is working on their implementation of arches for the National Inventory of Canada.
Hmm.
Uh, so
That's neat.
yeah, so I think that there are lots of different types of organizations, and then also a lot of universities using arches for like digital humanities projects having to do with historic places.
Great. Okay, another question is, does the Getty require that anyone using arches make their projects and inventories public?
No. So the Arches is open source software, so you can take Arches and do whatever you want with it. I mean,
Hmm.
it's and there are organizations that we don't hear from until they tell us that they have an Arches implementation. But really, it's up to you. You take the software code and you implement it on your own server. And that could be a closed server, it could be like an intranet, or you could have it just kind of locked down for only specific users. That's something that can be done. But essentially, it is we've developed it and it's out there in the world it's out there in its repository actually for you to take and do whatever you want to do with it. I
Hmm.
think we only have one stipulation, is that if you extend the software code and enhance it, that you make those enhancements available, the software enhancements, not your data, the software enhancements available to the rest of the community.
Hmm. Okay. I'm seeing there's also some questions in the chat. If people could put them in the Q&A, it's easier for me to see. But one of the questions in the chat is actually, Lisa is just asking if you can clarify the difference between the conservation and research institutes at the Getty,
Oh
in
yeah,
case
yeah.
people don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are 4 programs at the Getty. So there's the one that probably most people know about is the museum. So the Getty Museum, which consists of 2 museums, the Getty Center and the Getty Villa. So those are 2 museums, and that's one program, the museum program. The Research Institute houses the art library, and it's the research arm of the Getty. And the Getty Conservation Institute is we're focused more on advancing conservation practice. So whether that's producing literature, tools, processes, workflows, whatever it is, that's what we do. We're more outward facing. And most all of our projects are geared towards making sure that we are able to produce didactic materials for the field. And then there's the fourth program of the Getty is the Getty Foundation, which is the charitable arm. They're the ones that give money to different organizations according to their funding priorities.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. This is a personal fun question from Michelle saying, if you're from Carson, did you go to El Camino like the rest of us? Michelle took
No,
the architecture program.
no, I didn't.
Is that a high school? What is it?
Are you talking about El Camino College? I did not. No, but I did go to Carson High School. So I went to Carson High School and junior high, if you're interested, Carnegie, and now middle school, but formerly junior high.
Great. Okay. All right. Another question about how does AI interact with your role? Like, are you seeing any applications of AI in what you're doing or not yet?
Funnily enough, AI interacts with my role in that I get to answer a lot of questions about AI. And because, no, I mean, especially in the last couple of years, obviously with the generative AI that's come out recently, that people have more, there's more eyes on it. It's not like it just popped up out of nowhere, but I think that, well, mainly the way it intersects with my role is that it kind of makes me feel more strongly about what I do. So the thing about AI is that AI needs a good information source to actually be valuable. So, you might have heard this saying, garbage in, garbage out. And the thing is, if you put garbage into an AI, you're going to get garbage out. And our goal with the Arches project and with just promoting good data management practices is that that organizations, governments, whatever, are putting out information into the world that is easily digestible by other information systems, and that is then made available to people, whether it's being sucked into an AI and spit back out or other means. So the thing is, if your information, if all of the work that you've done regarding like surveys or reports, all of that, if that's locked in the drawer, the AI can't get to it, and it's going to take the information that is available to it. And so that does not serve us. That all of the hard work of all of our preservation professionals that they're doing, it's locked in a cabinet. And that means that all that information, all that work, all that knowledge is going to waste. I mean, it had that single purpose of maybe resulting in a nomination, or maybe it helped in regards to CEQA review, but it is for other purposes. When people are asking questions, that information is locked away. So I think for me, knowing that AI is crawling through the internet and using any information that it can find, it makes me feel more strongly about making sure that the work that we do is made available to the general public.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's a good point about it. Or you got some applause even. All right, next question is from Curtis. Curtis says, I am now in the process of creating a house museum in Pasadena, California, where everything needs to be inventoried. What do you recommend as first steps? Is it something that Arches can do? Is it something that a different tool is better for?
Well, here's the thing, I always like to, so Arches is definitely a tool that can be used, but I don't think it's never the start. I don't think it's the starting tool. The starting tool is pen and paper. Or just like, I always say that you come to Arches once you kind of organized everything and thought about how, like, what you want, like what is your end goal for any kind for this, regardless of whether it's Arches or some other program or database, you always start off with what is the purpose for that database or for that system? What is your end goal? What do you want people to be able to do? What do you want to be able to do with it? And you think about that, and then you can think about, all right, well, how does my data need to be organized? What does it need to do to fulfill those goals? It's always really thinking about what the purpose is first before you start with the technology, because you shouldn't have the technology tell you what to do. You should be telling the technology what to do. So I'd say a good starting point is just to kind of organize all your data and see like all the information that you have, what it is that you want to manage, and just kind of get that all organized and think about what you want to do with that, or how you want to use it moving forward. And then you can then evaluate whether or not Arches is actually a good tool for that, or if something else would be.
Yeah, is Arches more useful when you have data that needs to be like changed and updated over time, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, but that's definitely a good way to think about it, is that this is something that you're not necessarily, and I'm not, I know that there are some cities aren't changing their inventories without council approval. So that's a little bit different than other cities where the preservation staff can actually have their hands on it day to day. So I know that there are differences in different cities how the inventory process works. But yeah, no, it's either way. I mean, I think really the thing with Arches is that, for better or for worse, it's dealer's choice. You have a lot of choices how you want to set up the system, but that also means that, I mean, and this is for the for worse part, is that in the beginning, there's a lot of time spent in setting up the system to make it do exactly what you want it to do. And then once you've got over that beginning hump, then it is pretty much like, oh, great. Now it runs the way I want it to run, and it's doing what I want it to do. The data is, the data is organized in the way I want it to be organized, and I can just, use this moving forward. So I think it really depends on how your day-to-day use of the data is going to be, and who you want to have access, and also just generally your organization's capacity. Because I did not say this, but the software is free, but it's hosting it on your own server is not free.
Yeah, it's a powerful tool. Okay, a question from Ruben. How can I, as a licensed general contractor familiar with Adobe and traditional old world artisanal means and methods, get into the world of preservation and conservation work here in Southern California? I don't know if you have the answer to that, Annabelle, but what are your initial thoughts?
I'd say that, you know what, I mean, maybe this is me putting my CPF hat on, but I'd say this is a good first step by becoming involved in an organization, a professional organization like CPF, because I'd say that you really have the opportunity to make connections with other preservation professionals here in the state, and it's actually more than just the state, but also you also have the opportunity to learn a lot, because I think that's part of our mission, is the education of our members to be the best professionals they possibly could be. And I think that being part, whether it's just attending a webinar or taking part in other events, I think that's I think that's a really good way to kind of get started, and and I'd say another good way, especially if you're a face-to-face person, even if you're not, is go to our conference. So many connections, so much, not just connections, but I know that going to conferences generally, but definitely our conference, you get so much inspiration from others.
Yeah, it's a close-knit community, so it's like people share resources and connections and networking, and it's kind of still a very like personally connected network, I think.
Absolutely.
And that's why we do this program, because we're trying to help people like enter into that community and network too. It's an important
Hmm.
part of this. Okay. All right. Matt's asking, how can we encourage cultural heritage organizations and offices at local, state, and national levels to adopt and develop open source heritage inventory platforms, whether it's Arches or something different? And what is the biggest hesitancy to go down the open source path?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a lot. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that question. I mean, like I said before, it's not like uh, at, for this project, our main goal is not that everyone use Arches that they think about, but more that we promote good data management practices in the field, in the preservation field, meaning. And but in terms of the uptake of just generally open source, I know that some there is some hesitancy because open source feels a little to some people it might feel a little bit scary because it's the word open is both good and bad in the sense that sometimes people think it's less secure, but it's not. It's actually more secure because you have multiple eyes looking at the software, letting you know if there are any issues with it. Actually, and we've had several organizations, well-funded organizations, do security audits of the software. And most of them have come up empty, and some of them were just like, oh, hey, you need to do this. And so we did it. End of story. Versus with proprietary software, oftentimes you don't know what's under the hood. You're just trusting that that the company is doing whatever they need to do to make sure that that the software is secure or is it's well developed. But you don't know that because you don't have the opportunity to inspect the code yourself. So there's that. But just generally, I think with any new technology, it's always hard to uh, to have that be kind of championed especially at a, and governmental organizations because it's another thing to learn. It's new. It's a new technology, so there is a learning curve here, and it might not be as easy as something that you were trained on 10, 15 years ago and are continuing to be, and are continually trained on. So yeah, I think that with Arches, we're not advocating that people throw out their ArcGIS Esri software. Actually, in fact, we have ways that Esri software can interact with Arches so that you can have two systems at the same time because ArcGIS might be able to manage GIS data more robustly, and you might already have that infrastructure. But with Arches, you're able to manage things like significance. That is not something that is as easily managed in ArcGIS. So historic context, that sort of thing.
Yeah. All right, next question. Vina's asking, in conservation and preservation, do you directly work with historic architecture or buildings, or is it mostly working with the technology? I think in your you can speak to your case, I guess. Like
Okay.
everyone's
Yeah.
different.
In terms of like who am I working with generally?
Or I think the question is like, do you do any hands-on work with architecture, like historic
Me?
buildings? Yeah.
I wish. No, I mean, I don't. Actually, I don't. Specifically for me, I don't work on projects, even with Arches, very often. I'm generally the facilitator for helping people to create their own Arches projects. So I don't do it. At least I used to, but I don't do anymore. I don't do any surveys or hands-on um, work with the buildings anymore.
Yeah, and I think
So
it would really depend on the discipline, Vina, to answer your question. Like some people are out every day with hands-on like conservation of buildings. People like I'm a consultant, I work on projects, and usually I go out one time per project for like a site visit where I'm actually physically engaging with the building, and then I sit in my office and research and write reports about it. And then there are people who probably never go out in the field. It just really depends on what kind of sector of the field you're working in. Okay. All right. Morgan asked a question. What groups or organizations have you connected with that have been the most inspiring, beneficial, useful for preservation practitioners who are working with GIS and mapping data analysis as part of their work as historians? Sometimes it feels like we are working in a vacuum when it comes to GIS preservation, and it would be great to tap into other communities. So like just any projects that you've interfaced with that are really inspiring, I guess, in that realm.
Huh, that's a good question because like I will say this, that like my view of this is very limited because I mainly deal with arches projects, arches related projects, but I'd say that probably some of the more inspiring projects for me are the smaller ones because it's usually a labor of love where where somebody was like, oh, I saw that this is arches and I want to get this done. And I mean, I think in preservation we get exposed a lot to people who are just these singular people who make things happen. And I think that there are a couple of projects that I can think of where you know, it was a small group of people who decided that they wanted to use something like arches and they just made it happen. Um, and I think that to me, those are the most inspiring. But I also am like, I think the work that is being done in England always inspires me in general, because when you talk about infrastructure for inventories and documentation, there's so much infrastructure there for data practices for their inventories. And so seeing what they're doing over there, and actually a lot of the work that's been done in England helps to inform what has happened with the Arches project. So I'd say our partners at Historic England, like their work and the work in England generally around historic inventories is generally it's pretty inspiring for me because you know we in the United States preservation practice when it comes to inventories varies from state to state, city to city, and there's not a lot of coordination. And I think for me the dream has always been that there be more coordination in terms of um, what we're recording and how we're recording it, even though obviously the state by state, region by region, we're very different. Even the building types can be different, but I do think that there can be a common language when we're doing our inventories.
Hmm. Why do you think England is sort of ahead of the curve? Is it like a funding? Like I know that some of their preservation work is funded by the National Lottery, which is like a huge source of money. But like why do you think that is? Small country? I don't know. Like
I mean, I think that's part of it, but also too, I think that I think going back to the power of the individual, I think that, you know, that they have these organizations where there are just a lot of, I don't know how else to say this, but there are just a lot of knowledge organization nerds who just, you know, took it upon themselves to organize everything. And it is just kind of like, I mean, I know there's more history to that, history of how that's happened in England, but like, at least from what I understand, there are just a lot of people there who are really, really interested in the data management of it all and the kind of making sure that everything fits into a little box and all of that. It just kind of, I guess there's like almost like a regimented nature to it all
hmm.
and recording to it all. And maybe that's kind of a British thing, but
Hmm.
yeah, I think that there is just kind of they've kind of professionalized it, like knowledge organization in that way that it has not been done in preservation in the United States.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot, especially in California, a lot of our preservation work is reactionary too because of we a lot of it's driven by compliance. So it's just interesting. It's like a different context.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually two related questions here. So
Hmm.
one question was like specifically asking about like the recent drone strikes in Poland and how that might, affect cultural resources. And then Morgan's asking too, have you encountered areas that have been destroyed or hit by natural disasters that greatly benefited from existing inventories? I'm just wondering if you can talk about inventories as a tool for that purpose of like when things get destroyed, what do you do or how can the inventory be beneficial?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's better to have an inventory beforehand so that you, I mean, I'd say that, so I think you can think of two things. The inventories are, you shouldn't think about inventories in response. You should think about inventories in preparation. So that when a disaster strikes, then you have that inventory information to then be able to record what has changed or what has been destroyed. So it's just to think more about it as like, no, this is something that you have in place beforehand so that you can then record against your existing inventory. So you know where the historic resources are. And you're able to, especially if there is a need to prioritize based on that, or at least to record, to have information on that, you can do that. And I think that I think we saw an example of that with the recent wildfires in Los Angeles. In the Pacific Palisades, there was Historic Places LA. They were able to pull that data and from the inventory and use that to show very quickly what, you with also the other GIS data to see what historic resources had been impacted very quickly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm thinking about it as in terms of being preparatory as opposed to in response, I think is like the first step. But without that, then it's just then you're kind of guessing. You're kind of guessing, oh, was this historic? I don't know. Was there, and which is why it is really kind of the building block.
Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, as just with the wildfires in California, like it seems like it's even more important than maybe it was like 20 years ago or something. Yeah. Yeah, and Dennis points out in the chat that like sadly Altadena didn't have that level of inventory, so it's a different story over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna wrap up soon, but I had one more question for you that just kind of came up to me as we're talking. So I went to grad school like 20 years ago and I learned GIS. I took a urban planning class in GIS and it was sort of an optional thing. It wasn't taught as part of the preservation or, preservation planning curriculum. I'm not sure if that's changed in preservation programs, like if GIS is actually required or still just a kind of elective thing, but it seems so important to our field, and it's definitely something that I've drawn on a lot in my work, especially when working on surveys earlier in my career. And I'm just wondering, like, if you have, there's quite a few students on this call, people that are currently in a graduate program. Do you have any advice for learning about GIS, or like, how do you? I don't know what I'm trying to ask. I guess just like,
Yeah, no, I would say
what's your
like
advice?
if it's an elective, I would say definitely take at least one like introductory course on GIS so that you can understand how it can be used. Whether or not you know how to use it is one thing, but know how to create maps, that's one thing. But making sure that like you're able to take a look at a map and understand it is really important. I have this book on, well, not this desk, but my other desk that is called How to Lie with Maps. And it's really important because it's like you really, it's kind of like media literacy. You need to have map literacy. And I think it's really important to have that kind of literacy as you embark upon your preservation career. So I'd say if it's available, take an elective in GIS or seek it out. I mean, I think that I believe that most planning programs require GIS at this point. If
Yeah,
they
I think
don't, that's a
planning
problem.
curriculum does.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a
Yeah.
cornerstone, but in preservation, we don't often see that cross-pollination.
No, and I think oftentimes, generally I see like a separation between technology and preservation, and generally I don't think that should be the case. Whether or not you focus on it is a different question, but you should be aware of all of the technology and tools that are available to you in the world to do your preservation work.
Yeah. Good note to end on. It's 1 o'clock, and I know we have to finish on time today. So Lisa, do you want to close us out? And thank you, Annabelle, so much for being here today. It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, I know you have to go at 1, so I would just very quickly reiterate Gretchen's thank you. I found this incredibly enlightening, and turns out that we shared a lot of similar career paths. Annabelle, we'll have to compare notes sometime about our 10 years of marketing each. Everyone in the audience, a huge thank you for joining us today as well. We really hope you enjoyed the program. I've dropped some links into the chat. You can find out about our upcoming webinars. You can join CPF as a member, as I mentioned at the top of the program. We offer a free student membership for full-time students, good for 2 years. Or if you're able to, please consider donating to CPF to make programs like this continuing possibility. Huge thank you again to Annabelle and Gretchen on behalf of myself, CPF staff, education co-chairs, our programs VP, our president of the board. Thank you everyone for being here. We look forward to seeing you all at another program. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.